coverage, we'll look at today's decision by the Land Court of Queensland relating to the giant proposed Alpha coal mine. Also, on a much smaller scale, we look at a tribunal decision in Victoria concerning a coastal housing development and a bird called Latham's snipe. First, yesterday's decision of the New South Wales Court of Appeal that saved the village of Buggar from being followed up by an expansion of the nearby Mount Thorley-Harkworth coal mine. John Cray is a member of a residents group that took on mining giant Rio Tinto.
The village of Buggar is in the Hunter Valley, and near us, around about 5 to 6 kilometres away, is a very large open-cut mine called the Warkworth mine. And in 2010, they lodged an application to expand towards the village of Buggar, and which meant, as we saw it, the annihilation of the village. Various other villages close by to us have disappeared, Ravensworth, Warkworth, because of mine expansion. So clearly, when a mine intends to expand towards you, to within 2.6 kilometres of you, you are destined for the dust heap.
So you're saying it would have pretty much swallowed up the village?
Yes, the centre of town, they have what they call the compulsory acquisition zone, and there were something like 24 houses in the centre of our village that would have been acquired on the basis that you couldn't occupy them because of noise and dust. So in the centre of your village, and we only have 152 houses in the village, the town, as we would know it, comes to an end. No social fabric, the pub goes, the local service station goes. It's a disaster for these small country villages.
Sue Higginson, let me bring you in here. You're the solicitor with the Environment Defenders Office who acted for the Bulga community in their fight against the mine. What was the reasoning of the New South Wales Court of Appeal yesterday in the legal victory that it handed your group?
Well, basically the Court of Appeal, in its 378 paragraph judgment, has unanimously held that the Land and Environment Court got it right, that there was no reason for the Court of Appeal to intervene or interfere, and found absolutely no error of law on part of the New South Wales Land and Environment Court. So the decision of the Chief Judge of the Land and Environment Court, delivered in April last year, a comprehensive judgment of, again, 500 paragraphs over 174 pages, after hearing volumes and volumes of expert evidence challenging the merit of the proposal put by Warkworth Mining Limited, found all sorts of reasons to refuse that mine, and primarily that the environmental impacts and the impacts on the village of Bulga were so great that the economic justification for the mine to proceed could not outweigh those impacts that the Chief Judge found were significant.
Well, the proposed benefits were absolutely enormous. I saw something like $16 billion would be added to the Hunter Valley economy. It would directly create something like 150 jobs, as well as many other thousands of jobs indirectly, and also pay something like $680 million to the New South Wales government in royalties. So an enormous economic benefit.
All of that material and evidence was put before the Land and Environment Court, and the community was able to put forward all of its evidence to either debunk parts of the economic modelling that was used by the company itself, and with its own experts, the community was able to show that some of those economic arguments and projections were in part inflated, and was also able to put forward perhaps some of those more difficult to ascertain type of costs, as in seeing the end or the clearing of a significant endangered ecological community that is so rare and so unique, and what is the cost to the community, very, very long-term costs of pushing aspects of our environment to the brink of extinction. This was, in the Land Environment Court, a case where the community was able to argue with some of the best science in New South Wales and around the country, and put some of those incredibly skilled independent experts on the witness stand and present all of that evidence to an independent umpire, who then had to make a decision based on all of the evidence before him.
So you've just had this big win in the New South Wales Court of Appeal, but this is by no means the end of the battle, and in fact you might well have won the battle, but you're staring down the barrel of losing the war, aren't you?
Well, our understanding is that the company is intending to lodge a new development application, which there is nothing in the law to say that that can't take place or that can't happen.
And that new planning application will be under an amended or changed planning scheme, which was amended or changed because of the New South Wales Land and Environment ruling last year. Is that right?
There has been discussion that the changes to the mining state environmental planning policies were as a direct response to the success of the community in the Land Environment Court here in this matter, the Warkworth case. And I think the Minister has said that as a result of the Warkworth case, the mining industry argued that there was too much uncertainty. And yes, that perhaps preempted the New South Wales government to amend the mining state environmental planning policy to include a provision that says, words to effect, when a decision maker is assessing a mining application, then it must, as a principal consideration, consider the significance of the resource. And the intent of that is to put the economic considerations right up front and perhaps double weight those in an assessment process. So, yeah, the laws have been amended and the laws have changed.
With those changes in mind, the other parties in the dispute, speaking on the steps of the court, were taking the decision in their stride.
So Chris Salisbury, Managing Director, Rio Tinto Coal Australia. We're not surprised about the outcome of the Supreme Court. We've maintained all along this was a very slim chance of providing us a future of Mount Thorley Warkworth. The nature of the court process provided a very narrow point that we could appeal on, therefore we weren't surprised with the outcome today. What we are focused on is securing long-term approvals to protect our business, protect 1,300 employees and contractors' jobs, and we have already announced that we're pushing forward with a new planning application which has a significant change in terms of the offsets and mitigating actions.
Yeah, my name's David Bennett. So I've been at this operation now for 18 years. Some of my work friends and work colleagues have been there for over 30 years. This is a mine that's been around for over 3 decades in the Hunter Valley. And like Chris said, the important thing for us now is a process going forward to secure the future of our operation for all of the employees, the contractors, the companies that supply the mine, the Singleton local government area, and the economy of Singleton, the Hunter Valley and New South Wales. So it's of critical importance for everybody that this is approved. Time is of the essence.
Rio Tinto's new mining proposal will be decided under a planning scheme which was amended directly in response to Justice Preston's decision. Stephen Galilee is CEO of the New South Wales Minerals Council.
Well, the decision last year did come as a surprise because it threw out essentially decades of accepted practice on environmental and economic assessment processes in New South Wales within the planning system, particularly for mining projects. That's created a lot of uncertainty in relation to how projects are to be assessed going forward, including the rules and the policies against which they are to be evaluated. The decision changed the balance that had previously been set in relation to an assessment of economic and environmental factors, essentially lowering the priority placed upon jobs and investment and increasing the priority placed upon environmental factors, ignoring what had been accepted practice over previous decades. And the judgment also introduced some new concepts, some relatively obscure factors like a new term, solipsistia, which is apparently the loss of sense of place, a term that was created by an academic to describe how people feel when their community changes. It probably would have been fair if we also had a term for how people feel when their job disappears. That might have helped provide some balance there.
And do you say that investment and jobs were affected by that decision?
Well, we've seen over the past 2 years investment in mining in New South Wales half. We've seen over 2,000 jobs lost, including about 1,500 in the New South Wales coal industry. And a lot of that is, of course, driven by global markets, currency rates, commodity prices. But there's no doubt from what we've seen, New South Wales is now seen as a very poor place to invest in relation to other states in Australia which are doing better, and their mining investment numbers continue to increase or hold up.
Well, certainly in response to Justice Preston's decision last year, the New South Wales planning scheme has been substantially amended, and of course you would welcome those changes. What's your response to the view of environmentalists that the changes now tip the balance too far in favour of miners?
Well, I would question your description of it being a substantial change. I mean, what happened was a very small step in the right direction from the New South Wales government. The changes that were brought in October last year apply to only a very small section of the current Planning Act, apply to only a very small number of projects and only a very small number of factors in relation to those projects. And what those changes that were made effectively do is seek to try and restore the balance that was previously in place before this judgment and before the vacuum of policy that has been created over the past 3 years by the current state government failing to set policy direction. But much more needs to be done. It certainly wasn't a substantial change, and the extent of the change and its ramifications has been misrepresented, unfortunately.
Big picture question, how do you strike the balance between the interests of local communities who may well be very much opposed to a mining development and wider regional, state, even national interests in whether or not a mine should open or be expanded, as in the Buggar case?
Oh, well, every project, no matter whether it's a mining project or other development, is going to have some form of local opposition. There's also going to be some form of local support. I mean, let's not forget in relation to this particular project, there are 1,300 people employed at that mine, and most of them are locals who live in the local area, so they're part of the community too. It shouldn't be portrayed as a community versus the mine issue, but the way to strike the balance is to provide certainty about the rules, to stop changing them, to provide some certainty and direction, or even better, the government in New South Wales could accept responsibility for its own planning decisions and return to a system where the minister, on behalf of the elected government, actually made decisions.
John Craig, the New South Wales government has changed the planning scheme. The next time Rio Tinto tries to argue for an approval for the mine, there will be a different balancing of the competing interests here?
Yes, that's correct, but we would see it difficult for the Planning Assessment Commission, the people who are sitting on this and making the decision on it, to disregard all the evidence that has gone forward. And you would have to say that if the Planning Assessment Commission were to approve this next application, then that is the finish of the village of Buggar. It is the loss of a massive stand of world-unique woodland, can never be replaced. So you would have to say to companies like Rio Tinto, you are aware of the damage you're about to do, and yet you're still pressing on with another application. So we would further say, and if this application were to fail, would you, between you and the government, again change more rules to get it through for a third time? So where does this stop?
Sue Higginson, if I can just bring you back in very briefly. You've won a victory here with the community of Buggar, but that has made the New South Wales government spring into action. Is it possible that you might have saved Buggar, but maybe at the cost of future battles, future wars?
We have seen successes in the past with other matters, not coal mine related, with other development projects and other community groups. And we have had tremendous successes in the court, and then, yes, Parliament or the government of the day has changed the legal playing field. So we have seen this before. However, in relation to the change of the law, we do need to take a deep breath, and we do need to look at how the amendments to the State Environmental Planning Policy are going to be implemented and given life by the decision makers. And it's certainly something that we'll be looking at from application to application, and certainly something that we'll be looking at with the community in relation to any possible future application by Warkworth.
Lawyer Sue Higginson and her client John Craig. Disputes over coal mines are of course not confined to New South Wales. Just a few hours ago, the Queensland Land Court handed down a ruling giving the conditional go-ahead to the giant Alpha coal mine. Lawyer Sean Ryan works with the Queensland Environmental Defenders Office. It's a loose national network of community legal services. Sean Ryan acted for a group of local landowners who opposed the mine development. He joins me now from outside the Queensland Land Court building in Brisbane. Sean, how big is this project? It's truly gigantic, isn't it? And tell me, where is the proposed mine?
Yes, Damien, it is a very large mine. It's going to produce 30 million tonnes of coal per year, and it's going to leave a final void, that's a final hole in the ground that's 24 kilometres long, so very large. And it's located just outside the small township of Alpha in central Queensland.
Now, you ran a number of conventional arguments against the mine. What were they and what did the court find?
I suppose you'd call our conventional arguments the concerns about the inadequate assessment of groundwater impacts. And we also raised concerns about the inadequate assessment of the economic impacts of the mine. It appears from the Land Court's recommendations, and bear in mind I've only just walked out of court, so I haven't had a chance to consider the reasoning of the judge, but it appears from the recommendations that the court accepted our concerns about the groundwater impacts and has recommended that the miner take steps to address those concerns by reaching agreement with local landholders, and if it is unable to do so, then the mine is refused.
So what's the next step?
The next step will be up to the miner. It'll have to negotiate individually with each of those affected landholders.
And those landowners are what, pastoral leaseholders next door?
Yes, mostly pastoral leaseholders. And they're within probably about 10 kilometres of the mine. Because of that final void I talked about, it intercepted groundwater and would lead to evaporation of groundwater, and that would lead to a depletion of groundwater in the surrounding area. There was some dispute about the degree and extent of that depletion, and it seems that the court seems to have accepted that it may be larger than the miner has predicted, and therefore it needs to negotiate with more people.
Now, you also ran another argument, a climate change argument, a very novel one. What was that argument?
The miner accepted basically the science of climate change, that it is real, and that the coal, once it's burnt, will contribute to climate change. The volume of coal burnt over the life of the mine will result in about 1.8 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide.
1.8 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide?
That's correct. So we argued that that's a significant component of the world's budget of emissions before it reaches 2 degrees, which is the internationally agreed guardrails to prevent dangerous climate change. And it seems from a quick skirt through the judgment that the judge accepted that that was a significant amount of emissions.
So the judge accepted that these emissions are giant and will actually have an impact on world climate. But what did he or she decide about whether or not to take those into account?
It appears that the judge has taken a construction of the Mineral Resources Act about what's the scope of mining activities, and an interpretation of that is that mining activities are the process of winning and extracting the coal, not the transportation and use of the coal.
So whatever happens outside Australia is not relevant to the court's decision. Look, I guess it was quite a stretch to ask a court to prevent a mine because carbon emissions produced by burning the mine's coal, presumably in China and elsewhere, would impact on the world climate.
We don't think that judgment sits comfortably with the interpretation of the Environmental Protection Act, which requires indirect and cumulative impacts to be taken into account. And as you say, these climate change impacts are quite massive. And when you take them together with the groundwater impacts and the economic impacts, our central argument was that this mine should be in the public interest and it should show a net benefit. And when you take all those impacts together, our position was that it didn't demonstrate a net benefit for Queenslanders for digging up our coal, and we thought that that warranted refusal. So it was certainly within we felt, the interpretation of the Act.
Sean Ryan, lawyer with the Queensland Environment Defenders Office, thanks so much for speaking to The Law Report.
Thank you, Damien.
You're listening to The Law Report on RN. Perhaps you're listening to a podcast or audio on demand.
Perhaps we've finished listening to the radio because he's going to talk about a different topic, and I think we've had a nice little channeling of the concentration into mining and the law and state government interpretations of the law and state government modifications of the law when the law actually comes up with a judgment that the mining company doesn't like. the people at Bulgar were faced with an open-cut coal mine. They went to court to secure a ridge of buffer zone of undisturbed habitat between their village and the coal mine. Coal mine over here, village here, ridge. And it took a court case to get a judgment and a decision that they could have their buffer zone. And then later on the mine decided, oh well, we're going to put in a development application and we're going to mine that ridge anyway because the price of coal had risen. The people of Bulgar went to the Land and Environment Court and they won an injunction to leave the buffer zone alone. And the mining company appealed the injunction and the mining company lost the appeal against the injunction. So now the New South Wales Barry O'Farrell Liberal government has changed the Land and Environment Act so that the economic value of the resource to the miner has priority over all the other land and environment values. Endangered species, critically endangered species, last of a habitat, the viewpoints of the people who actually live there and have ancestral roots going back for generations. None of that matters compared to the right of the shareholder who lives anywhere in the world except where the mine's going to be, the right of that shareholder to invest in a fund, to run an operation, to extract and sell resources and make a profit on that operation and send the dividend back to the shareholder. And the shareholder maintains the right to buy and sell the shares. And if any damage is done by the company, the people who are aggrieved by the damage, the people who lose by the damage done by the company, they're only allowed to sue the company. They're not allowed to go after the fucking greedy mongrel bastard asshole shareholder. The shares are limited liability shares. That's what a proprietary limited company is all about. It was the invention of the proprietary limited company that allowed Europe to rape the fucking world. 1.8 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas from the 30 million tonnes of coal that they want to rip out of one mine out of the 4 mines or 3 mines, whatever it is that they got planned for the Galilee Basin. And the judge said, yep, that's okay because I'm only going to sit here with the illuminated tunnel vision and I'm going to look at what the law says about digging that out of the ground and whether you're allowed to dig it out of the ground. And the current known state of the science of atmospheric chemistry doesn't matter to the miners because all they're interested in is the precedent of what the law used to be 100 fucking years ago when their grandparents were putting the topsoil into the rivers and stuffing up the waterways while they were chasing gold or tin or anything you can dig up without having much of a brain for thinking about stuff. It's a long time since I had anything to do with forcing a mine to shut down for environmental reasons. That was relatively easy. It was an acid heap leach gold mine in the headwaters of the Clarence River Valley. It was a mine called the Timbara River Gold Mine. And I wrote 2 poems against it and performed them in various places, including the front of the courthouse on TV. And on the footpath in front of the Australian Stock Exchange. And eventually we got the message through to the council that because the shareholders of the limited liability company were not going to be responsible at law for the damage, then when the Clarence River became contaminated by the acid heap leach gold mine that was going to be put in a montane swamp in the headwaters, when the Clarence River became contaminated and when all its fisheries and industries and everybody suffered, they were going to be able to go chasing at law the Tenterfield Council for approving the project, and it was going to be the ratepayers of Tenterfield Council who would have to shell out to everybody who was aggrieved and damaged and upset and hurt by the malfeasance and the negligence of whichever council approved the mine. And yeah, the Timbara gold mine is a hole in the ground that nobody digs in anymore. But it's fairly rare that you can shoot the blame home to the approving authority. But in that case, nobody had to go to court because we were able to do it emotionally. We were able to use the tools of propaganda. Anyway, I think anybody who has a concern for law and order and the stability of civil society should be getting a little bit worried when the government thinks that it's a clever idea to throw its hand in with the interests of big business, big money and multinational shareholders when it comes to destroying the lifestyles and the environment of the people who actually live around where the hole in the ground is going to happen. And when that raw prawn with a cooked head was spouting on about all of the jobs in the local area that depend on his coal mine that he's going to destroy their fucking village in order to dig, just bear in mind how few people actually work in the coal mining industry in Australia compared to, say, the tourist industry. And consider the idea that in the Bowen Basin, which is in Queensland, they're about to open a whole new coal mine, and there are some jobs going at the coal mine, about I think 300 jobs, 350 jobs. And there are 2 villages of coal miners who live within half an hour's drive. But that particular mining company, it has in its mind the fly-in, fly-out model of operation, and they're not going to offer employment to anybody who lives closer than Brisbane, which is 500 kilometres away. Right? So to get a job in the mine, 15, 20 k's down the road, these people are having to move to Brisbane 500 kilometres away where it's much different conditions, and then go and get on a plane at Brisbane Airport and fly back to the mine and work there for 10 days at a stretch or whatever it is that is the automaton type existence that the shareholders and the managing director of the fly-in, fly-out, dig up the fossil fuel and shit it into the sky industry wants to do. God knows why they don't want local yokels working in their mine. The local yokels want to work in the mine, but apparently what they want is city breds. People who've got absolutely no connection to the land. Maybe they make better robots, I don't know. It's enough to give diarrhoea the shits what's going on with mining and resource extraction and the Liberal governments. They can't make the economy grow again because you can't have any economic activity unless you've got an environmental surplus, and Babylon has reached out, like right around the world. It's taken 4,000 years and they've done it. They've met on the other side and there's no more environmental surplus, so you can't have an economy. And instead of accepting that and trying to maintain the fabric and structure of society, what they're going to do is remove all environmental protection and all human and civil rights protection and try and force the economy to grow by just destroying whatever's left. They can't accept the fact that everybody has to lower their lifestyle. People my age who've got lots of shares on a pension plan, they've actually spent their great-grandchildren's entire lifetime earnings in order to get where they are now. And they wonder why the kids of the world are getting fucking sick of the old bastards. Wobbles on a lot to YouTube. How's that for an exercise in risk management? Ciao.